right, good evening, and welcome to the Breaking Conservative and Conservatism on Tap. This is our weekly series where we get to talk about politics and philosophy and everything that's going on in the world from a conservative point of view, but then we get to overlay that with all kinds of other beliefs and your comments and questions and everything that you think. So I'm thrilled to have my brother on the show again. Welcome, John. How you been doing, buddy?
Man, hanging in there. You might see my daughter running past the door here every now and again. She hasn't even gone to bed yet. So some days you're on schedule. Some days you just throw the schedule out the window. That's kind of what today is about, I suppose.
Yeah.
I'm at our parents' house because
Right.
we're still in the process of moving to new places, and they don't drink. So I got to respect that. So all I have is this tonic water.
Listen,
And I'm trying to remember who Burke actually is. I can't remember.
that's my first question is conservatism on tap. So I guess it's going to be conservatism from the fridge tonight for you. So.
It is, unfortunately.
Awesome.
Hopefully next week we'll be in a new place.
All right, good deal. So we got our first follower here, Recession Proof, said, "Hey folks, hey, how you doing, buddy?" All right, so for me, I am drinking a local beer. It's from Pensacola Bay. So I got my nice mug here. It's a Lighthouse Porter, man. And so I love porters. You got me into that when you went to Ireland, and you're over there where Burke is from. Came back and talked to me about all kinds of different beers and stuff. I'd never really had porters or stouts, and I got into that. So this is one from down the street in Pensacola where there's this beautiful lighthouse. I took my wife after I got back from being overseas, and we had a great time. And yeah, so there's this brewery nearby, and they put out a porter that's pretty good. So I'm having some of that tonight. So she got a
Porters are some of the best way to get into stouts, I tell you. If stouts too much for you, porters are right where it's at. Just like a pale ale is, just right for you if you probably are thinking that an India pale ale is too strong. So, gotta love a good porter.
We had another comment from Recession Proof, who's saying that he's in Trump country. So we're definitely going to be talking about Donald Trump tonight. But really, what I want to get into is really just the current tensions that's going on in our country. I mean, we talked about this a little bit last week. We talked about systemic racism. We talked about the riots that are going on and Black Lives Matter. And it just seems like that is blowing up even more. I mean, some of these rioters are continuing to gather. You've got the deployment of National Guard and Trump talking about the military. So really, it seems like that this debate is at its most tense moment, at least in the recent past. So what do you make of this, John, as we get into it? Like, what are your initial thoughts on what's going on?
Well, it certainly makes me frustrated about social media just in general. I've just really begun to think about how polarizing social media just is by the nature of its platform. I mean, comments are just not enough to be able to create a good, solid discussion. If you want to comment and say that this is what I believe, and you try and make it like within 150 characters, like you're going to get misunderstood or you're going to get blasted, even if you're well-meaning. If you're silent, then there's shame on you for that as well. So
Yeah.
I'm really, really stuck with all the polarization. And I know that's why we have things like this where we get to talk to each other. We have comments that we can address live. And I like that. I like that we can still use this as a space to meet regularly and talk. And I certainly hope that we can get more people on to be able to share their views as well, because obviously, as we all can tell, we're just a couple of white guys,
Yeah.
trying to make sense of all this. And that's where we're limited.
Sure. So one of the things I want to do tonight is I want to talk about that. I want to talk a little bit about, racial and ethnic identification. And then I want to talk specifically about Black Lives Matter, because it seems like that's really the hashtag that's going around is people are putting Black Lives Matter on a lot of things. And I'm curious as to what that means for different people, because I think I see people using it in different phrases. And then I also want to look at their website to be able to do that. Let's take it straight from them. So
Okay.
first thing I want to look at, though, is we had a couple of our followers share some graphs and statistics, and I know there's a bunch of that going around in terms of does an actual racial divide exist and to what extent is it, systematic, that type of thing. But I really thought these were interesting, so I'm going to read the first one to you. One of our followers sent this, and it says that blacks are more likely than other groups to see their race or ethnicity as central to their identity. And then it has the numbers. And so I guess the Pew Research Center asked a large group of people, and this is what they came up with, is that 52% of blacks surveyed consider race and ethnicity to be extremely important to their identity. and then 22% saw it as very important. So you're looking at 74% were put it in these high categories. And you contrast that with whites, where only 5% said that race and ethnicity is central to their identity, and then only 10% said it as very important. So that right there, man, that says a lot to me. 74% of blacks are saying that, hey, this is important to who we are as a person, as a group, and then as whites, not nearly as much. So what do you make of that graph first?
Um, I would say that I'm not too surprised by that. It just makes me more reflective about um, my own identity as someone who is white. And I'm thinking about when I was, when we were growing up with our families, and Wes, we only saw our family, like our extended family, what, maybe a couple of times
Yeah.
out of the year, right? And even when we did see them, like, so there wasn't a strong, like, huge communal family bond of just gathering over this huge legacy that is the Silers. We're just all it really was more of like our church ministries and things like that that we got involved in.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking that with that family dynamic was kind of absent in that regard, even though we had a good solid immediate family. That wider family was not as we weren't as involved with one another, so there wasn't that much of an ethnic identity in the family.
Yeah.
And even when there was, Wes, I mean, you recall there was racial tension brought up at the table every single time on Thanksgiving and at dinner by some of our extended family, and that made us kind of question what's the deal, what's going on in Memphis. But I tell you, it never really made me think about our legacy. I mean, I'm pretty sure like our ancestry.com stuff, like we didn't really engage in any of that until like our 20s. And even then when you get the results, it's just kind of like, oh, okay. All right, we're from Europe, go figure. So I think part of it is just how invisible it has been to us and just has not been on the forefront of my mind in my youth.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things for me where I don't even think about it, right? Like, it's not something
Yeah.
that, and maybe something that I exist with all the time, but I kind of agree with some of these statistics. Is when I think about myself, I think about, my family, my immediate family, or I think about my religion, or I think about my politics, and, sure, identify as a white man, but, you look at these statistics and you realize that even when we talk about race and ethnicity, it's something different. And so, and then you bring in the Black Lives Matter into it. So what I did is I looked at their website, blacklivesmatter.com, and I encourage you to take a look at it because that's what
Yeah.
people are citing a lot of times when they're saying hashtag Black Lives Matter. And I want to just go through it. So when you look at
Okay.
that website, one of the first things that they talk about is what they believe. And they say, 4 years ago, what is known as the Black Lives Matter Global Network began to organize. It started out as a chapter-based, member-led organization whose mission was to build local power and to intervene when violence was inflicted on black communities by the state and vigilantes. And in the years since, we've committed to struggling together and to imagining and creating a world free of anti-blackness, where every black person has the social, economic, and political power to thrive. So I guess, that's the initial definition, and it makes sense to me. So it's not just a saying, right? It's not just a phrase for most people. It's actually an organization that's supporting it, and they say chapter-based, member-led. And then they're specifically committed to working together and creating a world that chases after anti-blackness and fights it off. And the end goal of that is stated right there, where every black person has the social, economic, and political power to thrive. So that kind of makes sense to me, right?
Mm.
Is that that's what they're after. That's what they're going for. And so every time there's anti-blackness or systemic racism, as they're calling it, then they're going to chase that down and try to bring attention to that. So that's the group's goals. That probably doesn't surprise that many people, but you get into some of these details, and I found it to be very interesting. So they go through what are our ideals, and they kind of list that on their website, and they say every
Yeah.
day we recommit to healing ourselves and each other and to co-creating alongside comrades, allies, and family a culture where every person feels seen, heard, and supported. We acknowledge, respect, and celebrate differences and commonalities. We work vigorously for freedom and justice for black people and, by extension, all people. We intentionally build and nurture a beloved community that is bonded together through a beautiful struggle that is restorative, not depleting. And that right there, man, I love it because they're talking about how they respect these differences and they acknowledge, that people have different perspectives, and they're trying to support black people, and they say by extension all people. And to me, that actually responds to some of the all lives matter movement, right? Is that they're saying by extension of recognizing diversities within our own movement, we are trying to recognize and support all people. So, what do you make of that?
I really like the clause here where they're saying we recommit to healing ourselves and each other and to co-creating alongside comrades and allies and family a culture, right, where each person feels seen, heard, and supported. I like that idea of culture, and even on their website, you can see that one of the first pieces that they have is like the sense of culture that goes with their movement, which like inspires creativity
Yeah.
and the sense of not only speeches and charisma, but and web pages, but artwork, as well as so many different kinds of arts that go in with this entire movement. And I like that because it's showing that it's a way of life. So that surprises me in a really good way, that it's not just trying to say fight violence and racism with just threats or intimidation, or lectures at people. This is actually a movement of life that is going on. So I do like that a lot.
All right, well, let's look at some more on it. It talks about we are unapologetically black in our positioning and affirming that Black Lives Matter. We need not qualify our position. I don't know what they mean by that, but it says to love and desire freedom and justice for ourselves is a prerequisite for wanting the same for others. We see ourselves as part of the global black family, and we are aware of the different ways we are impacted or privileged as black people who exist in different parts of the world. And we are guided by the fact that all Black Lives Matter, regardless of actual perceived sexual identity, gender expression, economic status, ability, disability, religious beliefs or disbeliefs, immigration status, or location. So that there's your phrase, right? There's the actual
Hmm.
phrase, Black Lives Matter, and what it means to them. To love and desire freedom and justice for ourselves is a prerequisite for wanting it for others. And then talking about this global black family that they have. But you move on here, and it gets really interesting really quick as they talk about we make space for transgender brothers and sisters to participate and lead. We are self-reflexive and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift black trans folks, especially black trans women who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. And then they talk about building a space that affirms black women, free from sexism, misogyny, environments in which men are centered, and we practice empathy. We engage comrades with the intent to learn about and connect with their context. So here's my question for you, John, is when you're looking at some of this, they get into these specifics and they start talking about transgenderism and supporting that. I guess my question is, when you're talking about a movement that is celebrating life, to what extent do you think that they allow like some of the disagreement here? Because I mean, talking about transgenderism, I mean that is a hot discussion point these days. There's a lot of controversy surrounding that. When you talk about dismantling cisgender privilege and things like that, what are your thoughts? How does that relate to Black Lives Matter in your mind?
Well, I mean, I think back about some of the classes that I've taken over at VCU, and alongside the Black Lives Matter movement years ago, you had a movement as well that was LGBTQ related for African Americans. And I think you've seen these two paths cross, although this is very, very subtle. I don't recall exactly when they might have added this, whether it was at the inception immediately
Yeah,
or whether it was because they started finding that the funds were coming in, from other places here, and they felt the need to be able to represent that. I can't make a whole lot of assumptions there, but I know that both groups, the LGBTQ as well as African Americans, they have been treated horribly.
yeah,
Quite honestly, in so many different circles, especially around Virginia and Richmond area where I've been. So I can see how they view these microaggressions and direct aggressions like altogether as being one big just threat to the Black Lives Matter movement entirely. So I can see them cross. Although it does make me wonder how often they will push, say, someone who is maybe more conservative leaning and saying, uh, you know, if you think that someone who is an African American should not be killed, then you should say hashtag Black Lives Matter. But now, if you do that, you're affirming this whole list of other views that you might not necessarily agree with or you might be struggling with. But when you say Black Lives Matter, you're not just saying, you know, those who are black should not be killed from police brutality or racism or in any
yeah,
sort of way like that. You're saying so much more, and that's
yeah.
where the difficulty is.
According to the website, yeah. I mean, I guess that's the question. Is I think I have a lot of friends who use this phrase, and I don't know if they would use it to talk about transgender lives. You could say transgender lives matter if that's what you were fighting for, right? But it's interesting that that kind of like, to what I see as a separate cause, is kind of lumped in. Let's take it further. So they talk about one of their goals is to disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. We foster a queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual. I mean, I don't believe that, obviously that all people in the world are heterosexual, or, necessarily, I wouldn't go so far as to say they should be, like we can have that discussion. But it's interesting that that's, again, on their website is they're talking about a lot of other things like homosexuality, like transgender, like dismantling the nuclear family structure, explicitly here. And yet I see friends posting about it, and I don't know if that's exactly what they believe on those issues, and I don't know if that's even what they intend when they talk about Black Lives Matter. But to me, it's part of that when someone critiques the movement or they question it, right, and they say, well, I'm not sure that I follow that movement, maybe it's worth considering that this could be what they're responding to an extent. Because if we talk about, do we care about this ethnic group of people, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find someone who absolutely does not and is explicitly and overtly and meanly racist to the extreme. I'm sure those people still exist in America, but it's more of like some of these loaded definitions where people mean something totally different. I found
Mm-hmm.
I found this graph, right? I want to show you real quick, or this picture that someone took with their smartphone. And
Okay.
this guy is one of the protesters, and he says, matter is the minimum. Black lives are worthy, Black lives are beloved, and Black lives are needed, right? And I read that, and I'm like, absolutely. Like, I agree with that. I can affirm someone else's culture. I can say not only do they matter, but I consider them worthy, beloved, and needed. And I can respect and learn as much as I can to appreciate their other culture. I have no problem with that whatsoever. And if that's what you mean by Black Lives Matter, go for it. That's awesome. It's when you get to this point where seemingly it's loaded with a whole bunch of other different social issues beyond blackness that it gets a little confusing for me, right? And that's where
Mm.
there's some hesitancy, not on this picture right here, absolutely love it, but on some of the other things that I showed you already, where I didn't even know that's what someone meant by that word. And I think we experience that too, even with our channel, as people will see conservative, and that can mean a lot of different things. Conservative could be someone who supports Donald Trump. It could be someone who supports George Bush, right? Like it could, totally different politicians. It could be someone who's philosophically conservative, like we are. So I think it's just important to be specific about the definitions. And when you see people using Black Lives Matter in a multitude of different ways, you got to stop and question, be like, okay, what do you mean by that? Do you mean the website? Do you mean all these different projects? Or are you simply saying that this race and this group of people, this ethnicity, deserves our support, right?
I totally agree. I think though that you're going to be hard pressed to be able to do that over social media or any other place where you're trying to define. Okay, can we actually like break down what hashtag Black Lives Matter means? It's almost an impossible platform to do that, and you've got to just be able to carry that kind of conversation over to just other platforms of discussion, whether it's to your own circle, your own family, your own friends, or other acquaintances, where you can have those kind of spaces, and that's what we want to be able to foster. You know, I honestly wouldn't mind even saying like on my social media account, perhaps like Black Lives Matter, even just I would say pushing the entire movement if they were able to be more open and connective to like local ways that I can support my city or my town. I mean, what I see is, you can take action, you can donate. Obviously, you can purchase their stuff, you can sign up for updates, you can sign petitions,
Yeah.
right? You can get like active on I guess on a national scale. But what will actually connect me to my local? What local resources are available? Are they in any way connected to my city in some way? And I don't at least immediately see that. And certainly, like I wouldn't be saying that unless I tried to look up where you could get involved in my own city. And one place that I've been connected to for years now has been Richmond Hill. That used to be a monastery back in the 19th century.
Yeah.
And after the Civil War had concluded, you had a bunch of these nuns come in and they prayed for racial reconciliation. That's what they prayed for, and they had done that for almost a century. And now the monastery is since relocated, but this place, Richmond Hill, is a nonprofit, and they encourage multiple different faiths to come in. They encourage many people to just have conversations about racial reconciliation. There's tutoring, there's education centers, there's workshops, there's webinars, so many different things where you can get involved to actually make a difference in Richmond, Virginia. And it's those kind of things that I really wish there was easier outlets to be able to say, yes, Black Lives Matter. Now, how can I actually translate that into local action? And I think that that's lost. It's really just left up to, okay, you've protested and you've really gotten your word out there. So now what do you do?
Yeah.
Do you just wait around? Like, how is there any sort of follow up to this of you've got the nation's attention? Now, how do you enter into the system to overturn it, reform it in ways that are productive and useful? And I'm not seeing that connection.
Yeah,
That connection is just hard to find. It really is not easy to do, and we need more organizations to be able to connect and converse together so that people can be filtered from protesting to actually, okay, how can we actually make a difference where I'm at?
Right. It's the difference between going through that route to action and actually making a difference versus politicizing it to a point where you throw in all these other issues that may be related, but on the surface, a lot of people I don't think are aware of. I want to take a step further.
Yeah, if we don't do that, all people will become from being politicized. You'll have a whole generation being politicized by what's going on here from these past couple of weeks. Now, are they just going to be reactionary doers all the time, or can we actually funnel them in to be thinkers and intentional doers and proactive and not just reactive to what's happened, but actually re-enter in and say, okay, this is how we're going to make an intentional difference.
Yeah.
That's what I want to be able to see.
Yeah. And Alex just posted, he said, we must move from protesting to policy crafting, which I think he put out some suggestions that were awesome on that. So, but that's awesome. But so here, that's a graph. And then the statement Black Lives Matter means a lot of different things to a lot of people. Let me show you another one. So I'm pulling up the image of Trump outside of St. John's Church in DC. I think this means something to almost everyone. Right? We posted this on our page, and I asked, what is one word that describes how you feel about this image? And we got over 100 comments within a day of people posting all kinds of stuff. And some people had to say more than just one word. They felt so passionate about it. I think and almost everybody fell into two groups. There was one guy who wrote indifferent, and then almost everybody was proud, excited, way to go, mega. And then there was other people who were disgusted, cheapened, traitor, hypocrite. And John, what I did is I put that, and I'll show it to you here, is I put that into a graph that I want to kind of spend the rest of our time dissecting, because it talks about that divide in our country. So it's on the screen now, and you can see on the left.
I see.
Yeah, there's this viewpoint that I was trying to look at the assumptions for of how do you get to the point where you see that and you think those words. And I worked backwards from all my interactions and some of my own thoughts. And I said, you begin with this belief that America is great. And a lot of people have experienced America's greatness. The freedoms that we have, the Constitution, the products that we build, the wealth that we have created for ourselves, all of the influence that we have. And then you move to America is under attack. So from that assumption, you get to a point where you say these ideals are threatened. They're in question. And I put a photo there on the left of some of the rioters who are burning American flags. I think big time there is a belief that the Democratic Party is, attacking American values and trying to change things in their progressivism. Really look at Bernie Sanders, and he's bringing in socialism, which has never been a major force in America today. And then you go from, okay, America's great, it's under attack, to Trump is defending America, and he plays this hard. I got, photos of him for fun, when he's hugging the American flag. But you think of his policy proposals and his entire campaign and where he's at today and what people think of him, and they think he's responding to these threats. Clearly in this image, he's responding to the rioters. He calls out the Democrats, right? He doesn't take it over, lightly from them. And that leads you to this, okay, when I see him make this statement, he's proud. It makes me proud and resolute He's confident. I'm hopeful because he's holding up a Bible at a church. He's clearing off the protesters, and he's standing up for American values, right, that have long been, part of religious liberty, or some would even say a Christian nation type thing. And then you look at
Hmm.
the other side of, you begin from this standpoint that America is flawed. You think about slavery, you think about segregation, you think about the racism that's been part of our country, you think about the violence that is perpetuated by not all but some police against victims, and you go from that standpoint to America's flaws persist today. And so you can think about Confederate flags. I mean, I grew up with that, and in Tennessee where we lived, people flew the Confederate flag. You have it in Alabama. If you drive down the interstate, you'll see it.
Yep.
So you have these relics of the Confederacy, the statues and things like that. That people are thinking about the heritage of the South, and they're expressing it through a symbol that others perceive to be racist. And you think about George Floyd, which we've talked about, and people are saying that that's evidence of systemic racism today, which is clear to them. And then you go from that to Trump is not. They don't see him as defending America. They don't see him as fixing it. They see him as exacerbating the flaws with his Twitter and stuff like that. And
Right.
immediately the media jumps on him. And he said this is racist. He said that, and it's racist. And then you get to this point where when he makes this statement, they are frightened. They feel sick. They see not a fulfilling of America's values or him making it great. They see a fraud. They see not true or sincere Christianity, and they talk about how much does he actually know about this religion or whatnot. And so there is that culture war, John. As we can just the same way that we can look at Black Lives Matter and see different things, we can see their website talking about different values that some may or may not associate with it. You can look at this, and people can arrive at completely different, if not opposite, conclusions by seeing the same thing happen. So I guess my question for you is, how do we work out of this? How do we get to a point where there is some exchange? I mean, unless you believe 100% that your belief system is right, and that everyone who disagrees with you is 100% wrong, and furthermore that you don't and never will need them to do anything, then you have to have some form of exchange, right? So how do we facilitate
Hmm.
that is my question for you.
Man, there's just so much there, Wes. I mean, the graphic sums it up really nicely. But I'll tell you, I mean, when he's holding first off, when he's tear gassed, protesters, and then he has this photo op here. First off, he's been really, really, bashed by his own administration, his Secretary of Defense. There's been people stepping down left and right, around the White House administration because of all this. But when he's holding up the Bible, kind of like that, I've never quite seen someone hold up the Bible like this, after tear gassing a crowd. I mean, he wants you to see this divide. That's exactly what that photo does. Is that you're either with me or you're against me. That's just how Trump is. You either totally, you're either all in with him, or if you even slightly question him, you're completely out. I mean, that's just what he likes to do. He creates that divide. So if you're going to look to your local leaders, I mean, I know that I had mentioned before, like how amazing would it be if you actually had some leaders gather together just to show that, hey, we can have a civil discourse. Part of that was meant to show you that how laughable is that? If that's laughable and it won't happen there, how is it going to happen anywhere else? I mean, I know that when we were answering comments on our feed,
Yeah,
we try to have discourse, and all people want to do sometimes is just to insult or polarize immediately. They don't want to talk.
yeah,
So, Wes, it is a challenge. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen through say Facebook necessarily. I think it's a good way to stimulate some discussion and let you know that
yeah,
there are spaces available. We're trying to do that through our book club that we're starting. If you're even remotely interested in anything that Burke has to say, that does not mean that you have to be conservative. You can be libertarian, you can be liberal, you can be hard right. It's totally fine. You could have voted for Trump and still vote for Trump in the future. That's totally fine. We want you in if you're willing to be able to have a civil discourse and learn that your ideology might have its own limitations, and you're willing to grow from that. Just as we totally acknowledge that our own ideologies might have its own limitations, we want to hear from you if you will want to hear from us. But Wes, it is hard to find that kind of space, but we are doing what we can.
well, so I want to go back to kind of the intent in making this is, when I look at this, right? I can see aspects of both sides that mean something to me. I mean, I do believe America is great. I think it was founded upon religious liberty. I think that many people fought and died to make America what it is and to get it to this point. I don't ascribe to the notion that it was built purely on the backs of racism. However, racism was a part of it. And so there are aspects of America that are flawed as well, right? So no one's perfect, and therefore no country is perfect. I think America, by and large, is a force for good in the world, but I'm willing to listen and learn from people who want to talk about America's flaws, right? As long as we don't get into a notion that we forget about all of the good things. And you kind of work through this, right? The same way. Is America under attack to an extent? Yes, I would say it is. I mean, when you look at what Bernie Sanders was talking about, and, thank goodness he's not the nominee, but he was talking about some pretty radical change that would have fundamentally reshaped America and its economy
Hmm.
based on socialist principles. And he talks about democratic socialism. That's still a foreign concept to America. I don't agree with anyone who would say otherwise. I'm going to have a hard time understanding that because our founders did not use that type of terminology to describe what they were setting up. However,
Yeah.
if someone wants to talk about America's flaws persisting today, I'm willing to entertain that notion and listen to them. I'm going to want like some proof and evidence of that. But if I have friends who are in interracial marriages and they talk about the looks that they get and how they're treated and all that stuff, and I want to listen to that. I'm like, make sure I'm not treating you that way. And if you're hurt because someone's been racist towards you, like let's talk about that. Let's figure out how to move beyond that. So I know that there is racism still in our country. I'm sure of it, but to what extent it exists is kind of more of an open question that we have to work through. And you just kind of keep going
Mm.
through this, and then you get to Trump, and he's probably doing a little bit of both. He probably is defending some great things, but then the way he uses his social media and stuff, he's telling you everything he thinks the minute that he thinks it. And so it's that type of conversation that we have to have, John. Is we have to look at our assumptions, and then we have to go there to the most basic levels. What do you think about this country? What do you think about what has happened in it and what is going on today? And let's work through those things and be able to recognize, that where someone is coming from. And so if someone brings to me America's flaws, I see it as a way to make America better, to continue to be great. If you're not aware of your flaws, how can you, like when I'm at the gym, I know what I need to work on, right? When I'm thinking
Yeah.
about myself as a person, I need to work on my patience, and I need to, be more kind to people that I disagree with. Whatever it is, as I'm working through my day, I'm trying to do that. And so, I think that's how we do this. If we don't get to a point where we can examine ourselves and our assumptions, then we're really going to struggle to have any type of discussion to someone else. Now, when
Well, part of it was, if I can jump in here, I think part of it is trying to be able to locate those people who are willing to have that level of consciousness to know that, hey, listen, the world isn't ending tomorrow. If your person who you want to get elected isn't elected, it's not like it's the end of the world, right? It's hard to find that. People are in this, it's easy to get within this one state, I would say, of consciousness to believe that if we don't act now, if we don't do this, if this isn't happening, then we lose. We lose. The ride is over, or the Democrats are just done. They're completely finished, and it's easy to get caught up in the moment by moment, the day by day, especially when things are horrible, especially when acts of cruelty do happen on both sides. It's easy to just get locked into that, and instead, what you need to be able to do is have a wider view on things, the people who can step back and see that this will one day be history, right? Just as we have come from a history of flawed individuals, but great thinkers who are willing to try and get past those things and to work out those, solutions that might have to be addressed hundreds of years down the road. We need to be able to do the same thing. And we can talk to somebody else, even of a different ideology, who has a similar perspective that, hey, listen, like, whether I live, whether I die, and I see, my person get elected, or I see this movement succeed or not, it's okay because I know what I believe, and I believe that that's the truth here,
yeah,
and that's going to see its light someday, as opposed to, oh man, the world's ending.
yeah.
Oh man,
Well,
if this isn't happening, like it's all over for us, or we've got to push this through now. It's hard to be able to talk to someone in a civil manner and have a productive discourse when they're in that state of
Yeah.
consciousness. This has to broaden out and see the wide picture.
One of the so we're almost out of time, but one of the last things I wanted to talk about is Drew Brees, and I do have both of his statements, before and after his apology. But
Right.
I asked on our page, should he have apologized? Because his first statement was coming out in support of kind of that left side that I had. The if I go back to the graph here, he's kind of in support of the America is great, is under attack, and Trump is defending America. He's talking about the flag and what it means to him, and how he doesn't, he won't yield to someone who doesn't, see the flag that way, or who, he's invoking Kaepernick, who's going to kneel, while the anthem, right, is being sung. And then within just a day, he's apologizing because, he's getting all this criticism for saying that, and then he comes out saying, almost the opposite is now I understand. And I asked, should he have apologized? And everyone said no. Every single person who commented was like, no. Even liberals didn't respect his apology because they said
Hmm.
clearly he didn't mean it because he switched within 24 hours, right? And
Hmm.
you have this standpoint where this person kind of goes the full spectrum on there. And I think my criticism for Drew Brees is it seems like he really didn't understand what we just showed. He really didn't understand the fact that there is this completely other belief system in our country, including with people that he works with, in the NFL. And whether you agree with him or not, you need to be aware of that. If you're going to make a statement, you got to stand by it. If you're going to be as strong as he was when he said it, you shouldn't be surprised that you're going to get this kind of backlash. So I think that's my criticism for him. More so than him being on one side of the fence or the other. Plenty of the NFL players can disagree and have all kinds of different perspectives on this, but you got to be aware of the impact of your words and where you fall in that spectrum and who you're frankly
Hmm.
make angry by saying what he said. So, what do you thought?
Oh, I think you've got even his wife apologizing now for the things that he said. Like everyone has to apologize, for the words that he's had. But I mean, I think that when you change your views that quickly, obviously, that's you should have been thinking before you had spoken, right?
Yeah,
But that leads us to question, okay, can views actually change, and how long does it take for those views to change? Obviously, it takes longer than 24 hours, but
yeah.
we saw him fluctuate between both sides. But was there a space for him to actually work out all the complexities?
No,
You know,
no.
is that actually there? And if it's not there, then if what can we do for ourselves?
He,
That's the challenge.
he lost the left whenever he said what he said about the flag, and then I think he lost the right whenever he
Lost everybody.
does that quickly, and he didn't gain the left back, which maybe he was trying to do as Agent West. But I guess that's the difference, John, is that what we have to do in this channel is we have to create a space where we're aware of the different beliefs. We may not agree with them, but we give them the time to be interacted with, and we stick to working through those and figuring out the truth that's within them and then moving forward. And to me, that's conservatism. That's the conservatism of the American founders, is that you had liberals like Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine who were involved. You had moderates who were involved. You had true conservatives, I would say James Madison and John Adams. You had maybe the heart right, in that. You could say Alexander Hamilton to an extent. You had all kinds of different belief systems who came together and were able to create something amazing through that. You see that throughout our culture is that when people are willing to work together and they agree on these basic American ideals, that they can do a lot. And so being cognizant of what someone else believes is a prerequisite for that. But once you get there, you can get to this point where you can advance your own agenda better and you can work with them to get the things that you need done. And that's what I want to see from the conservative movement. That's why we do what we do. So, hey, thanks for being here
I
again. I
think
really enjoyed it. Love this conversation. Let me give you the last word and then we're out.
No, I think that people get sometimes discouraged and they say, well, if you're not making policy immediately, then what's the point in talking to you? And I think that's just a very narrow-sighted view. I think that change begins when we treat each other like human beings. Too much polarization is already happening on the national scale. If we treat each other like human beings here in this space, I think that can only grow out. I encourage everyone who's watching that if you'd like to be on the channel at some point, just give us a shout, and we'd love to talk with you and see how to make that possible. Hopefully, it's chill. We just ask you to drink something, right? Subscribe to the page. Become a follower. Share us your email if you'd like to. Write an essay.
And
Shoot, we'll
soda
put it up on here.
apparently can be soda if you're at your parents' place and they don't like drinking.
Apparently, it could be soda. Jeez.
But yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. So
And I'm going to drink
our
extra next time.
channel, subscribe, take a look at our Facebook channel, our Twitter, and then we're about to start our book club here pretty soon. So thanks so much, John, and we will see you next time.
All right, next time.
Bye.